Shush.
Okay. Good evening, everybody.
I just sent him a text to see if he's coming.
Shall we give him a minute or no? Okay, well, good evening. I don't know that we will have a lot of formality, but I did want to kind of go through a few things, starting with I'm Roden Hart. I am the mayor here in the village of Trumansburg. With me here, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves and then kind of give a little bit of history with respect to the reason why we're here, and then explain kind of where we stand. And then, anyone at the table, feel free to jump in if there's anything that you want to add or feel that I missed while I simultaneously admit people to the Zoom. Slide that over. I'm trusting that everyone online can hear us okay. If not, wave. If you do when we get to the Q&A portion, if anyone online has a comment or a question, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom chat, and I will unmute you. Again, trusting that everyone can hear me okay. Okay. So as I said, I am Roden Hart. I'm the mayor here in the village of Trumansburg. With me are members from the Three Falls Local Development Corporation, and I'll explain what that all means here momentarily. As well as representatives from New York State Parks and the Baden-Powell Council of the Boy Scouts. So I guess we'll just go around the room and everyone can introduce themselves. Whoever wants. Why don't we start with Fred?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Fred Bond. I'm your regional director for the Finger Lakes State Park System, overseeing about 30 facilities across 10 counties in the Finger Lakes State Park region. Office is in our backyard, just below the overlook at Savannah.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Olson. I'm the town supervisor for the town.
There's Golden Deputy Supervisor and Matthew Bull, I'm the scout executive for the Boy Scouts tonight.
Deb Notke, I'm the deputy supervisor for the town of Covert.
Ben Carver, deputy mayor for the village of Trumansburg.
There's one other member of one other representative from the town of Covert who we hope will be joining us here shortly. So why are we here tonight? What's the history of this? If we go back to the fall of 2021, the village of Trumansburg and the town of Ulysses in particular were approached by some members, including Matthew, of the Baden-Powell Council, informing us, this was probably September, October of 21, if memory serves, informing us that the Scouts had come to the decision that they were going to be selling the Camp Barton property on Cuba Lake for a whole host of reasons, primarily due to, and Matthew can explain more of this if anyone is interested, some funding requirements that were being required of them by the National Boy Scouts, and the Baden-Powell Council decided that this piece of property in particular held significant value, and that if they were going to offload something for value, that would be the one. And would we, specifically the village of Trumansburg and the town of Ulysses, be interested in buying it? The village's interest down there specifically has to do with one half of our water supply system is located at Camp Barton, thanks to a almost 60-year-old easement that was granted to the village. So the answer at the time was, well, no, we don't have that kind of money lying around, but we're certainly interested in what happens to the property. My understanding at the time was that there had been some conversation with Parks, but for all the reasons that Fred can elaborate on if he so chooses, probably not the least of which is staffing, which is everyone's headache these days, right? That they probably weren't going to be moving forward on that. I frankly kind of dismissed, me personally, kind of dismissed the thought at that point, again, September of 2021, until about a month later, one or two residents in particular, and then I had a conversation with Deb Notke, asked if there was anything that I thought the village might be able to come up with to essentially prevent the property from having a real estate sign put in the ground up on Route 89, with kind of this vision of, we don't know who's going to buy it. We don't know what would happen. Do we end up with a harbor hotel style resort, which frankly, from an economic standpoint, would probably benefit the region, but would certainly change the face of that part of the lake. So I started making some phone calls, including to Assembly Member Kellis, who is a Trumansburg native, for those who are not aware of that. She had just at that point, so again, October of 21, been involved in the New York State purchase of the Bell Station property across the lake near Milliken Station. So I don't know what all happened behind closed doors and how Albany works, but the next thing I knew, there was the potential for something to be done at the state level. Somewhere in there, Fred and I started to have more serious conversations about what that might mean. And Bill, we have a spot for you up here. Bill Shaw, folks, is the other representative from the town of Covert on the Three Falls Local Development Corporation, which I'll be explaining here in about 90 seconds. So my conversations with Fred and probably started late fall, early winter of 2021. And what Fred made clear to me was that there was some willingness on the part of New York State Parks to purchase the property, that there was ample funding to do so, essentially irrespective of what the appraisal value and sale price might need to be, but that Parks did not have the capacity to manage the property on a day-to-day basis. They weren't looking to add yet another park for this headquarters to staff and manage. And did I have any ideas? And I don't know that it was my idea. Where we ended up settling was that if we could come to some type of mutual collaboration between the town of Covert, the town of Ulysses, and the village of Trumansburg, then we could collectively enter into a licensing agreement with Parks to manage the property if and when Parks were to acquire it.
The only thing it's pretty timely. This is something that we do across New York State. It is something that we do here in the Finger Lakes region. So if any of you have been up on the shores of Lake Ontario, there's Beechwood State Park. That is New York State Parks property, but it is operated and managed by the town. So that's been an arrangement that we've had going on 15 years now with that municipality, very successful partnership there. So, there was this model that we had in place that we thought might be applicable in this situation.
And I recall in some of those early meetings and conversations, Supervisor Olson, and please add context or content if you'd like, Caitlin, through some of her background on the professional side, had been in some, had worked for some organizations that had licensing agreements with the state. So this was not entirely, it certainly wasn't unprecedented, and it wasn't entirely unfamiliar to a couple of us. The rest of us were, how's this going to work? So fast forward a few months, we had a public information session at the fire hall back in February of 2022, where we said, this is what we're going to do. And then essentially for the remainder of last year and even into the first part of this year, the three municipalities, Town of Covert, Town of Ulysses, the Village of Trumansburg, were creating the structure whereby we would be able to manage or enter into a licensing agreement to manage the park, while Parks and the Scouts discussed and came to terms on a purchase price. The end result, and what is Three Falls Local Development Corporation? The end result is that there is a carve out of New York State corporations law, which allows for municipalities to form a not-for-profit. It's the only exception that I'm aware of. Normally, municipalities cannot own other entities or be part of a not-for-profit, except when they are these quote local development corporations. A local development corporation is an entity formed for some economic benefit to the region. And it's very kind of open-ended as to what that can be. So clearly, from an economic standpoint, we have, the Finger Lakes Wine Trail, we have our local economies between the two towns and the village, and we have the desire for more lake access. We know how busy Taganek Falls State Park is in the summer. We see the notices when the park is closed to any more vehicles today. So there's an economic driver in this region that has everything to do with tourism, everything to do with agribusiness, and to potentially see a piece of property as beautiful as the Camp Barton property end up being developed for either residential use or commercial use. While there are merits to those, it would certainly be a loss in terms of the possibility of public access to the lake and any economic drivers that come with that. So as of April, I believe it was, the Three Falls LDC became an entity. We have an agreement in place between the three municipalities to be the three members of that LDC. It has its own board of directors and they sit before you this evening. And that entity will be, once the purchase is concluded, the manager of record via a licensing agreement for the operation of what will be a state park, a New York State Park. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that piece.
The only thing I would share is that the sale process, purchase process was one that required two independent appraisals by New York State Parks. So your tax, it was well researched. There's no negotiation. We come in with an appraised value. We make an offer. It met the needs of the Boy Scouts. There's no dickering that goes on in that. It's a letter that goes in. This is the value. Is it acceptable? In this case, yes, it was. The great news is that purchase agreement has cleared state parks, the attorney general, and the state comptroller's office. And now we're just doing some title search, but we're very, very close to being able to close on the property and finish it up and make it New York State Parks property.
Back in February of 22, we indicated it would be a best case 18 months, but anywhere from 18 to 24 months was kind of the established timeline. The Village of Trumansburg has some experience with this. The other half of our water well system is located at Taganek Park North Point. And I believe construction on those wells started in 2015, and it took all of 3.5 years to get all of the approvals done simultaneous to construction with, again, the comptroller, the attorney general's office, every commissioner of parks, everyone who needs to sign off on New York State doing these kinds of things. It was a long process. So I think the fact that we're February would be 24 months. So we're 19 or 20 months in and looking at the finish line for a potential closing in the near term foreseeable future. Never put a date on closings, I've learned, is certainly a good thing that we've hit the shorter end of the potential timeline. As far as the LDC, one of the reasons I wanted to have this meeting was number one, we haven't given a public update on where things stand with the purchase of that property since February of 22. The other reason I wanted to have the meeting is I I can't help myself. I sometimes am on social media and read what people ask and what people say. And there hasn't been, and this is largely due to the fact that we haven't had any public information disseminated in a broad form in 18 months. But there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation about who's making the purchase, what the use of the property is for. Is the town of Ulysses and the town of Covert going to do X, Y, and Z with the property? And so part of the intent of this meeting tonight is to make very clear, this will be a new New York State Park. It will be named something State Park. We haven't settled on the name yet. If anyone has any wonderful recommendations tonight, would be a great time to hear it. So it will be a state park proper, and part of the risk, if you want to use that word, of parks licensing with a third party entity to manage it is, and I think this may have happened in the past, if they're dissatisfied with the management of the state park, there is a process to find someone else to manage it and or take over the management themselves.
You're gonna do a great job.
We're gonna do it. We're gonna Fred doesn't want that headache. So if that version of the movie were to play out, it'll be Fred's eventual successor that'll have that headache. But the reality is, it is a New York State Park. There is no option, choice, or any other for any of these three municipalities to say, well, we would like to use the property for X, Y, or Z. New York State Park, period. Where the licensing agreement gets interesting is it gives our management group, the LDC, some flexibility to determine how much of what a traditional state park does do we think we can do. Are we going to have swimming on day one? Are we going to have overnight camping? Are we going to do events? And I think all of those things are future possibilities, but in what timeline or time frame we move into that is what our organization, the LDC, has to wrestle with. There's practically speaking, and I'm making up dates, don't hold me to this, if the close of the sale occurs in the first quarter of next year, and we, the LDC, enter into a licensing agreement to begin managing this property as a state park in May, I don't imagine that on May 1, we're going to be open to anything you can imagine, or even everything that Taganic Falls State Park does on a regular basis. That's going to take time. We have to ramp up to that. But the eventual goal, I think speaking for most or all of us on the LDC, the eventual goal is in some, let's say, 3 to 5 year time range that we will be able to do those things and offer those things. And with that comes planning, with that comes funding, with that comes staffing, all of the things that Fred will happily not have to worry about. We will be taking on.
And I want to just take a step back before we're getting into some really good important detail, but I want to go back to some of the early conversations and describe a process that I'm very proud of. What became very clear to me was I had to get to work. The reason that state parks became interested in this property was the community's interest. But the commissioner of state parks, Eric Kulisade, was in for a tour February of 2022 for the deputy commissioner. They did a windshield survey of Camp Barton in February, and they were amazed at the property, at the opportunity that the property has. And they basically, the commissioner told me, Fred, we got to figure out a way to do this. We've got ways to do this. So get to work. And the beautiful thing is that this has been a very good collaborative process between all three of the municipalities and the Boy Scouts. And there has been some, I think you would be very proud. We have been, these are timelines, these are the deliverables, this is what we've got to be working on. And all of us collectively have accomplished that. And that's what has enabled us to hit this timeline mark that we're at right now, where we threw a dart at the wall, 18, 24 months. It's only because we were all doing the hard work, working extremely well together and honestly together. And it's been a real pleasure to be part of this. This has been good work. And I've been reporting up to our commissioner. He's very proud of this, is very excited to come in and do a signing event around this and really celebrate this as an addition to the state park system. Very exciting.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I would just say from the Boy Scout side of the process, we went through, obviously, internally with our own organization and board, came to a very difficult decision regarding Camp Barton. And as you know, as Warden said, as Fred said early on, we approached state parks and, you know, didn't see there was any interest there. But I have to tell you, it didn't mean we lost hope. And we had a number of volunteers working, Brad Granger, who's here tonight, Bill Wright, who unfortunately is no longer with us, working hard for the possibility that maybe somebody else can come and play. We don't have to piecemeal it apart. We don't have to turn it into the playground for millionaires. We can really turn it into a camp, or keep it a campground, have that ability or have some access to it afterwards. And with that, rallying, you know, the group here, I just have to say the community's been very supportive of this. Our scouting community, again, you know, it was a difficult decision, but at the end, this allows, I think this is the best possible stewardship decision we could have made for this property to ensure that it stays in the public trust forever, as it was intended to when we purchased it nearly 100 years ago. And so I want to say thank you to all of you who've been sensitive to our needs and absolutely acting in good faith from the very beginning. It's been a tremendously positive process, at least for all involved here. Thank you.
Anything else? An interesting piece of my history is correct. I believe it was 1922 that New York State purchased the property that is now Teganic Falls State Park. And I believe it was at the time also used for scouting, which is what forced the scouts north a few miles. So exactly a century later is when the conversations began in earnest about the possibility of this piece of property becoming a state park, and we're now within sight of the finish line. And if any of you have ever done any work with Albany, you'll know that you're not told what the actual closing signing date is until shortly before, and that's perfectly fine. But I'm hoping it's within the next few months, if not sooner. So that's kind of the where were we and where have we come since February of 2022. I did not intend for this meeting to be anything more than that dissemination of information and then open for comments and Q&A. I think I'd like to spend as much time on that as folks would like. If there is any, we can get into a lot of the details about the machinations of how LDCs work and how appraisals work and and all those things. But I think honestly, I don't know that a lot of folks are interested in that. So I would rather open it up now to questions, comments, as all of you might have them. Yeah, Brett. If we could pass the mic around just so that folks online can hear you. There's a switch on the back. Either way, there's a switch on the back. You just got to turn it on underneath. There you go. Yeah. That one right there.
There we go. Evening. Hey, Fred. Brad Farnham, and I'm a local resident of Bloomsburg. Saw some of you guys last night. We also have a family property down on Frontenac Road, just through the Scout Camp. Has been in the family since 1941. So we have a little vested interest in how this all shakes out. Couple things. First of all, we need to name it Frontenac Falls State Park. No, why not? No, Fred. Well, why not? We tried that. Okay.
There
that's fine.
is,
It's my suggestion.
so, okay, let's, because there are, excellent suggestion. Okay.
Thanks, Fred.
We vetted it And the history of Frontenac as an individual is.
Okay, fair enough,
tarnished.
fair enough.
And,
Understood.
yeah, and as much as I.
The
you know, I-
undercurrent political stuff, yeah, I get it.
It's not,
Okay.
that dog isn't gonna
Fred
run.
Bond State Park?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
So
Um,
one point I'll make to the naming. So as Fred mentioned, you know, we actually had been, and I think I even used the name Frontenac Point State Park at one point. We've been using that as kind of a placeholder. As Fred mentioned, you know, there's a sensitivity to the actions of individuals after whom certain properties have
Oh,
been
sure,
named.
sure.
So that unfortunately was not a name that we will be able to use. And I think generally, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a disinclination to name parks after people. And so we will have to come up with something that is acceptable yet non-controversial
Understood.
and not named after an individual.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Working on it. We're happy
I,
to take suggestions with those parameters.
Okay.
If you've got an idea, throw it at me and we'll throw it into the mix.
I do have a couple other questions.
Yeah.
And concerns. The employees, if there are employees down there, would they be state park employees? Or would they be TFLDC employees?
Great question. That is something we are in the process of discussing right now. They will not be New York State Park employees.
Okay,
The options that the LDC has currently are, as a standalone entity, we can have our own employees. With that comes payroll and benefits, et cetera, et cetera. We can also take a page out of Bolton Point, the Greater Tompkins Municipal Health Insurance Consortium, which many of you may not be familiar with, but it's a $70 million entity now. Employees of those organizations are actually employed by one of the municipal members.
Hmm.
And then the entity reimburses the municipality for all the costs.
interesting.
The advantage of that is that those employees would then be state employees, which gives them access to state retirement, and so on. So we have to decide, partly from, like anything else, partly from a cost perspective and partly from how do we attract folks perspective. You know, there's some, again, not to get too far out into the weeds, but if we go the municipal employer route, then there will be a civil service component. There will be a state retiree cap if we ever hire a state retiree. So there's those permutations we have to work on.
I go down there almost weekly. And there are people fishing off the docks, walking around, walking their dogs, doing things in cars that people do in cars, legal or illegal. Who will be monitoring that? And is there liability right now? I mean, I know there's one or two no trespassing signs. As a landowner down there, you know, if we put trespassing signs up, we literally have to put a string across the end of our dock to make it look like at least we're trying to keep people off of it so that somebody doesn't fall in and then we're liable for that. I'm sure that's a big concern and probably will be talked about ad nauseum behind closed doors to figure that out. But do you think that'll be a state park function to monitor that at some point, or local municipalities?
Right, so it's actually a two-part answer.
Yeah.
So conceptually, we have to imagine the park like Teganic. If it opens at, you know, if it's dawn to dusk, then you're not supposed to be there after dark. Those, I would imagine the rules will be similar. In the case of Teganic, Park Police, which is really just a division of state police at this point, patrol the area. The responsibility for making sure that patrols occur at the whatever the Camp Barton property ends up being called state park, will fall on the LDC.
Okay.
So whether that means negotiations or collaborations with state police, Seneca County Sheriff's Office, since it is in Seneca County, that will have to occur.
Okay, and then my last question, I noticed driving down the other day that the town of Covert reduced the tonnage of the bridge through the scout camp from whatever to 3, I believe, which is basically a pickup truck pulling a boat. The road that comes up the dirt road, which is, I guess, what South Frontenac Road, I believe is technically called, is a seasonal road. There are permanent residents who live down there. What's the plan for redoing the bridge and or making the road year round? And then, because there are property owners who own property adjacent to the current dirt road that is deemed not of value because it's a seasonal road, would then be potentially taxed differently because now it's a year-round road. Would there be any grandfathering in of tax rates and all that kind of stuff on that property if it's still undeveloped?
So Deb is really glad you asked about the bridge and the road.
I'm sure she is.
Actually, we have, the town of Covert has received a grant. And we're getting a new bridge.
Oh, great.
And it's going out for bid this fall, and construction will start in the spring. So we
Cool,
will have a
cool.
new bridge, but in answer to
Yeah.
your question about the tonnage. Yes, they were red flagged, even though we're getting a new bridge. The boys or the highway department had fixed it, changed the weight limit to 3 tons.
Right.
Now it's back up to 5 because they put more metal braces underneath it.
And they also put 3 tons of concrete on top of it too, but that's beside the point. Right, okay,
But,
yeah, okay, okay.
but that's why. the
Okay.
tonnage had changed
Okay.
because,
No, I knew that. I figured that.
But
Yeah.
incidentally, we got the grant.
That's fantastic.
a Couple years ago.
So the dirt road will not be
That
year round, or who
road
knows?
will be Done also,
Okay,
hopefully this winter. It doesn't look like it's gonna get this one, but the next spring again, probably in conjunction with the bridge. But if we
Okay.
hired out, this will
so
be-
that would be a year round access road then? Okay, right. Because tractor trailers have to come down that road now.
Yeah, we're gonna pay the whole thing.
And there's gonna be pull offs and things. That's why the trees have been coming down.
Okay, okay. Do you let property owners know that that's going on?
We are going to do that when we
Okay.
know more exactly.
Gotcha.
what's,
Okay, okay.
The assessment question would have to be asked of the Seneca County Assessor's Office.
Right.
Yes. Figured I'd throw it
I
out.
don't actually know how that would.
Yeah.
Yes, we have 2 new assessors. We do, but not some, just in the town of Covert. Yes,
And I guess the last comment, thank you. This was fantastic.
I'm glad you
Yeah.
like it.
Yes, yes. Anybody else?
I was
Before-
going to suggest, oh, is that,
No, you go ahead.
okay, I was going to suggest Three Falls State Park, I mean, named after it, it's, you don't have to have anybody's name and it describes it, and I think it's just a wonderful property. I'm so glad that, it's being preserved. My question would be that, is there going to be more opportunity for members of the community to get involved in managing the park, making recommendations, bringing in more volunteers? I work with the Cayuga Trails Club. They great at building trails. There are things like that we could do that, maybe enhance it. Won't cost a lot, that won't cost the state or the local people money, so.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely going to be a lot of opportunity to take advantage of, sounds bad, but to utilize the services of volunteers. We will be maintaining a relationship with the scouts, who will be, and we haven't hammered out all of the details of the agreement. So don't ask me for those details yet. But it'll be some type of use agreement, certain dates, certain times, certain campsite locations, so that the scouts can continue this 100-year-old tradition of using of the property, which also brings in additional volunteer assistance for certain things. Because it is a state park and because the LDC is formed of municipalities, we do have a certain amount of state oversight, which a traditional not-for-profit doesn't have with respect to employment and things like that. So certain job descriptions, if you will require employees. But there will certainly be a lot of work that can be done by willing and able volunteers. Great. If anyone online has any questions, just a reminder, please use that, if you can find it, use that raise hand feature and we will get to your question.
How are we doing? Kai Welch, proud Ulysses resident. just hypothetical, the closing is January 1st. What happens next? What's the rough timeline? What are the rough next steps over the next, I don't know, 6-12 months?
So our intention from the beginning, and I believe we're on track, is to have the licensing agreement with Parks executed simultaneously or as close as possible to the closing of the purchase of the property. So effectively, the next step would be the LDC with a licensing agreement with Parks would have until some determined date, theoretically in your example, summer, to determine what programming we're going to be able to support for the summer of 24. So, you know, if the sale of the property and the licensing agreement had occurred, let's say this past September, and we targeted next summer as a chance to open the park, then from September through May, let's say, our role or the next steps would be maintenance of the property. How are we going to make sure that the grass is cut and the roads are plowed, et cetera? As we shift the timeline of closing a purchase of the property and execution of the licensing agreement towards next summer, the timeline shrinks for us to begin the operations. So long-winded way of saying the next steps are whatever is needed immediately for ongoing maintenance of the property is something we will have to be ready to do right away. Could be as simple as contracting with, you know, a local business to make sure the grass is cut once a week. And then part of our meetings now at the LDC is putting in place the structure to have employees, however many that may be, determine what, as I said, what programming we're going to offer next summer. What kind of time frame and schedule do we want to create to ramp into future programming in future years? So it's kind of like a business startup. We're going to have to decide how much can we do in year one, make sure we have the capacity and frankly, the money to support that while we then ramp up our quote business in year 2, 3, and beyond. So the specific answer, you know, on day one, it'll kind of depend on when closing occurs. If it's January 1, well, right away, it's going to be probably just plowing, you know, plow and salt for a couple of months as we target summer of 24 for some level of operation.
Another important thing to understand about this license agreement is that any revenue that the LDC generates from the parking fees, camping fees, those are retained by the LDC for the operations of the facility. Okay, State Parks does not get involved with there are, you know, should the LDC so desire, we can make available the reservation system that State Parks uses to allow people to make reservations for camping, and we can bring that technology and support it. But the revenue would be something that would remain with the LDC.
Yeah, that's an important piece because I hesitate to verbalize what we have talked about internally as to what the end goal is, because then people begin to expect that in the summer of 24. But just for the sake of this conversation, if we fast forward, let's say 8 to 10 years, we should imagine that this park will operate not dissimilarly to the way Taganic does, with people in and out when there's availability of space, summer programming of various types. The Scouts will have programming there. The capacity to hold events, you know, people rent pavilions at North Point all the time for their wedding or their reception. We'll want to grow into that process. And I'm not aware that there is a state park in New York that loses money. So we want to get to a place where at worst, it's a break-even proposition and a self-sustaining operation. And more than likely, given the numbers that I've seen, we will be turning, quote, a profit every year. Now, that gets interesting because the municipalities can recoup any money we've spent or put into the LDC up to that point. But then once we've recouped all of that, the money has to set aside purely for park operations. So there won't be the ability for, you know, the village of Trumansburg can't turn it into a money grab and say, well, there's a bunch of money sitting there. Let's disperse it from the parks to the municipalities, but we will certainly be able to recoup our costs up to that particular point.
And then you've got, a fund for capital projects,
Right.
looking into the future. Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing about the future. The village had a very clear vested interest, right, in the park because of water. And I'm sure, I won't speak for Covert, but Covert also, and being in Covert, I'm sure that was one of the big reasons you had a vested interest. For the town of Ulysses, one of the reasons our board got behind it and wanted to be a partner is because we manage the Trimsburg Ulysses Recreation Program. And one of the main features of that recreation program is summer camp. And we've been very fortunate for many years to have that headquartered at the middle school. But there are spatial limitations to running the program there. And every summer we hit capacity and there's waiting lists for children to have access to affordable summer childcare. I mean, it's a really critical feature for our community to have access to summer, to care during the summer. And we are at capacity with what we can offer at the school. And if you're familiar with the program, they spend half the day in doing activities at the school. And then they either have been going to Taganek State Park to go swimming. If it's closed for HABs, they go to Watkins Glen State Park, where they swim in the swimming pool. So, and for 6 weeks, this is providing affordable childcare. To the point of that, what I mean by affordable is it's $150 per child per week at the top end. We subsidize every child who qualifies, who qualifies for free or reduced lunch. But the other, and I am a big fan of the Human Nature Center. Comparison of comparable childcare is twice that price in the town of Ulysses. That's the alternative, or the alternative is, of course, you have to find your own childcare. The town of Lansing runs a very successful summer camp program, recreation program, headquartered at Myers Point. And the town of Ulysses saw this as a really great synergistic opportunity because the recreation department is actually co-sponsored between the town and the village already. That's a relationship that goes back quite a number of years. And we work very closely together to equally contribute financially to the success of this program, because we recognize that working together makes us significantly stronger. So for the town of Ulysses perspective, this became an amazing way to hopefully be able to center our recreation summer camp program at camp future to be named State Park moving forward. Now, will it be happening next year? Absolutely not. Will it be happening hopefully in 2025 or 2026? There's a lot more opportunities for us to start moving there. And frankly, I'm hoping to grow into the town of Covert and be able to provide a quality camp experience, a premier camp experience for our kids, our collective. And so I just wanted you to understand a little bit what, it makes sense for Covert, makes sense for the village. Why would we want to be a part of that? And that was one of the driving factors.
I have kids in that camp and they love it. And I love it too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
But this would also include South Seneca students as well. Because they have had to discontinue their camp because they didn't have any facilities to go to.
Hi, I'm Carly. I live in Ithaca, and my family has been in the Boy Scouts for many years and has gone to the camp, and we love it there. I'm very glad that it gets to continue to be a camp. I was wondering who will be deciding what roles, like what jobs are created to manage the camp, and where will those be getting posted?
Great question. Some of the roles and responsibilities will be dictated by the licensing agreement with New York State itself. And then from there, the LDC will have to determine how to staff that. We have, and I'm not sure, I think you were here. We haven't yet determined whether those folks are going to be not-for-profit employees or somehow state employees through an employer of record arrangement with one of the municipalities. So I'm hoping that by January-ish, mid-January, we're going to have that part defined, as well as what positions we initially need to hire for, with an anticipation of of having those people in place for summer of 24. So short answer is stay tuned because we have to define those things. We have a web page dedicated to the Three Falls LDC operation on the Village of Trumansburg website. We'll eventually be getting our own standalone website. But one of those weird requirements of the comptroller's office, because municipalities are involved, is we have to have a web page somewhere. They don't care where. So the Village is hosting it for the moment. And when I find it, I will announce it.
I did have another comment, another question.
Yeah.
We haven't had any HABs down at Three Falls State Park in many, many years. So as opposed to Teganic Falls State Park. So,
Well, I could keep hoping that.
yes,
Good
okay.
source.
Um, as again, a question regarding the access to South Frontenac Road and the cottages and permanent residents down there. Will there, what in your envisioned great minds, is this will be a one-way in, one-way out park? Do you think it's going to be using both roads? How is that bottom of South Frontenac Road going to be widened and accessed so that people can turn right at the bottom of South Frontenac Road instead of going into the Scout Camp K turning and coming back around?
Great questions.
Or because I heard yesterday, or I actually heard tonight, somebody said there's going to be a toll bridge at the bottom, and I know that's not going to be true. But there's probably, I mean, if it's going to be run like a state park, there would be some sort of a kiosk to let people in or out, or if it is a full, will residents and renters and owners below be granted access all the time?
So a couple of questions in there. First of all, the first part is this is going to sound like a dodge, but it's not. Those roads are town of Covert roads. So it's entirely up to the town of Covert. Just as Route 89 runs through Teganic Falls State Park, it'll be entirely up to the town of Covert, whether they are one-way roads, two-way roads. Currently they're two-way. So the LDC will not be making that determination. We can certainly make a request and say, it would really make more sense if we did everything a particular way. But it'll be up to the town of Covert whether that were to change or not in terms of the roads. Second part of your question is a very good one. There have been some suggestions, there have been some comments around, is there a way to allow for either discounted, if we're charging a fee, discounted access to local residents of the three municipalities who are involved with the management of the property? And the answer is no. That is a function of the property being a New York State park property, not a local municipal park. And so the licensing agreement, which is still in draft form, but close to being finalized, has very clear stipulations that the LDC, as the manager of a state park, cannot differentiate between A, who can access the property because it is a state park and must be open to the public, and B, what's charged.
Oh, so thank you for that answer, but maybe my question wasn't specific enough. The people, I think you all hear me.
Yeah.
The people who live down there with cottages down there, if there is an entrance at the lake end of the current North Frontenac Road, and they cannot get through from the South Frontenac Road, will they be given access through that to their camps, houses?
The answer would be yes, by virtue of the fact that it's a town road.
Yeah.
It's not a park. It's not a park road.
So
So what you're saying is there'd be no trigger.
not in the road.
Not in the.
There
not-
can't be a ticket booth in the road like at Teganic.
Well, and one of the, I know going to Watkins Glen State Park, I feel like it made one of the transitions earlier. Now, if you go to the base of the trail at Teganic, to walk the Gorge Trail, there's now an automated ticket booth there when people aren't there that you can, scan your card or you can pay an entrance fee. I know that a lot of the state parks have gone to this, to some degree, honorary. By your honor that you pay to be there, then you get a ticket, you put it in your dashboard, and if you don't pay that, then you get a ticket or something like that. I would suspect, and I would push for, because I think from a staffing standpoint, it makes more sense. Something like that in place. I mean, it makes sense as a collection fee, just as a transition to the more cashless society we seem to be moving towards in a lot of ways. So I think that's would be probably in keeping with what's happening in state parks and in other places even nearby.
Yeah, I mean, if we, and the two properties are not similar enough for this to be easy to visualize, but if you kind of try to, you know, if I live on, you know, pick a road just north or south of the park, you know, Watermark, and I'm coming home from Ithaca, I'm not charged to drive, quote, through the state park on Route 89. So the same would apply to those roads there. Where it'll get interesting and what the LDC has to figure out, and this is part of the ramping up process, is as you drive down Frontenac Road and the lake is on your left, when you turn right to park in the park, how do we properly charge those folks and not the folks driving through? Is it staffing with ticket booths? I haven't taken a toll ticket on the throughway in a couple of years now, and I certainly get charged for driving on it. So technology will allow over time for us to get the revenue that's required from people who are using the park exclusively and not bother, you know, the residents with those types of mistakes.
And this is one of the rules that we, you know, we've discussed this, the sort of the technical advice that we have as a state park. We can bring those sorts of resources to the table and help with design, help with technology implementation. So
yeah, and I'll take a slight moment for a tangent. You know, Fred mentioned how well this group has worked together, all of our agencies and municipalities, and over the last almost 2 years, and I don't think that can be overstated. If you've paid any attention to local politics anywhere ever, it's hard to get one board to agree on something sometimes. So to get 3 municipalities on the same page, an agency as large as the Office of, you know, Parks, Recreation and Historical Preservation, you know, I don't know what your budget is, but it's large, right? To get all of these agencies working together has been, I think, it hasn't actually been a monumental effort. Nobody had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do anything. It's been a fantastic collaborative effort, you know, all the way up to Albany. Fred and I are aware that the governor is aware of this and is as an upstater herself, is quite pleased with what's happening. So that's been fantastic. And from the outset, Fred and his staff at Parks gave us copies of their budgets here locally for this particular park, so we can kind of see what we're getting ourselves into. His staff and the park manager at the park have offered as much assistance, help, and advice as we're able to stomach to get this thing going. So I'm not worried about that part, and I think the devil in the details will be the growth and the ramping up piece of this endeavor. Yeah. Marie.
Where does the initial funding come from? Fred alluded to the fact that revenue from accessing the park and using the park would be for the Three Falls LLC. But where does the initial funding come from for all of these expenses to make it a state park to begin with?
Sure. So the funding for the purchase of the park is entirely from Parks headquarters in Albany. My understanding is that there's a fair sum of money set aside for Parks to acquire property when it's appropriate, and that was never an issue.
It's 2 separate budgets that I.
It's not
But
friends.
the operation budget is always a challenge, and staffing is always a challenge. Our agency's capacity across New York State to purchase property, a separate pot of money, much of it is bonded, it's linked to the Bond Act that passed, now linked to the Bond Act that passed a year ago. So the ability for our agency DEC to purchase open space and recreational property is robust.
I like that word, robust. So the purchase of the property is not a local spend. The 3 municipalities each have already allocated funds from their respective budgets to the initial LDC funding this year, 2023. We are in the process. We have developed a draft budget for 2024. If that requires, or it's likely that it will require some additional funding from the membership, the 3 municipalities, which will be part of those municipalities' budget cycles. And then something that we're looking at doing, and we've already in many respects begun, is raising as much, because the LDC, take a slight tangent, and Maureen will understand this well. As you know, municipalities cannot do fundraising because we're taxing authorities. Governments in general can't do fundraising. The LDC can. So even though the LDC is, and one of the reasons why we went that route is because the LDC, though its membership is entirely local government, it's a not-for-profit that can do fundraising. It can apply for both municipal-based grants, New York State Parks and Trails grants, for example, because the applicant is municipal. It can also apply for not-for-profit private sector grants because the applicant is a not-for-profit. So we get to have the best of both worlds in this one particular instance because of the structure of the organization. So initial startup funding is municipal. And then depending on the success of our grant applications going forward, as well as fundraising, good old fashioned, please donate style fundraising, it's very likely that we won't need any additional municipal funding beyond 2024 before we even begin to calculate revenue generated by the property. Eventually, we would like to see the revenue generated by the property be the break-even proposition for the businesses that are operated out of the property at worst. And then any funding that's outside of, any funding that is not tied to use of the park, that's either grants or donations, the LDC will retain. And the faster all of that happens, the faster the municipalities can recoup our initial investment.
What was the initial contribution from each municipality to get that basin fund?
For 2023, it was $10,000 each. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Right behind you first, Jules.
I'm not sure if I'm correct, but does the upper property near 89, has that been purchased separately? And how does that impact on the plans that you have?
It doesn't impact our plans at all. The purchase of the upper piece of the property was by a private individual. And so no different than someone who owns a home on, I don't know, pick a road, Willow Creek, that butts up against state park property. You know, that individual owns this property on the upper end of the Camp Barton property adjacent to Route 89. So it doesn't impact that portion that will be a state park. And it doesn't impact our ability to operate the state park. We just have a neighbor.
Can I make a comment? I know that purchaser, but I'm not going to say this person's name, but this person is an ex-Eagle Scout and also purchased it to maintain it as it's standing today. Yeah. So he's not planning on developing or parceling all around that. He wants it left the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to speak for anyone as to their intent for property, but yes, it's my understanding that the individual who purchased that property intends to preserve it. Yeah, Jules.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first question, do you want me to stand or sit?
Whichever you prefer.
Whatever I do.
Just don't stand on the chair.
Yeah, what's going on here is a miracle. In other words, the creation of a state park is a miracle in these times. So my question is to Fred, and then I'll sit down while you answer. I have one question, but the Fred is, how often does the state of New York create a new park?
We have in the last year, created Sojourner Truth State Park down in the Hudson Valley.
Okay, Hudson Valley.
In this region. Geez, I'm looking at Jim Dunn, who even predates me, I think. Was it Rivers Beechwood? Two Rivers Beechwood, and that goes back, you know. Yeah. It's a rarity.
It is a rarity.
It's been many decades,
Yeah.
many decades. Yeah, Beechwood was 99.
It's a very.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Thank you. The gentleman from the Boy Scouts. The center of this beautiful park is this great magnificent sign for Louis Agassiz Fuertes, who was one of the most famous ornithologists at Cornell University and also one of the most famous bird artists. He is incredible. And my wife and I, Patty and I, married 67 years happily. We go down to the park probably 2 or 3 times a week, and we don't go for walks because Patty has trouble walking, but we just slowly drive around. Do you know when the Louis Agassiz Fuertes, the beautiful sign, was created? How far back?
There's 2 guys on TV up here who have it as their background. I'm sure Jeff Smith knows,
Oh, yeah, they do.
or Scott, maybe.
Give me a second there, Jeff.
Yeah, you can unmute Jeff. Briefly. Be careful.
There you go.
Jeff, when was it? When
Very
was
much. Yes, sir. Trumansburg High School class of 1973 graduate. And I grew up in Trumansburg. My dad was on the Town of Ulysses Town Board for several decades back in the 60s and 70s, Bill Smith, if anybody remembers him. So the actual building date was for the 1964 National Jamboree for the Boy Scouts. It wasn't called the Louis Agassiz Fuertes Arch then. It was for that particular National Jamboree for the Boy Scouts. And it was built there in the 60s. My first year at Camp Barton as a scout, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, was 1967. And I was on staff, and I'm proud to now be involved with the Camp Barton Staff Alumni Association, and our president, Scott Stolte's online. And we're very interested in trying to work with the entity that's being created. I am so grateful that we're going to have scouts still involved at camp. And I came up this summer to camp for the first time in 40 years from Florida. And I really love seeing Trumansburg. So that's the story on the arch.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else, Jules?
That's fine. Thanks, Roden.
Anyone else? Yeah, Brad.
Sorry, I'm getting messages from friends watching online who can't speak, but they're down there as well, along the road. So I guess it's more to the town of Clover, more to the South Frontenac Road at the bottom there. Will there be specific signs saying State Park entrance on one side, not the other? And if it is turned into one-way in, then that there needs to be some significant change at the bottom of South Frontenac Road where it hits the bottom at the lake, because you cannot take anything with a trailer and turn right at the bottom of that road. And with delivery trucks and stuff like that, I know my family had the opportunity to rebuild our place there in the past couple of years, and construction vehicles coming down there, lifts, all sorts of stuff. It was a mess. I know other people are planning on doing some building down there, remodeling, and unless it comes down through the paved road, as we call it, the north end, it'd be very impractical to continue doing that.
So again,
I know,
Cover
to the town.
for the road piece, the signage piece, the parks, the park proper, its signage will be the responsibility of the LDC, and Fred made us aware that he actually has a sign shop down at Teganic. So we're going to certainly beg, borrow and steal if we have to, signage for the park itself. Route 89 signage will be a DOT function, but we'll be able to work with them. And then the signage on the two Frontenac roads will be a town necessity.
I think one of the concerns of some of the people down there is if you have grandkids, you walk up the dirt road, you pick berries. Right now, you got some big pickup trucks that come down there barreling down and scares the heck out of people. We had a runaway up there about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, coming down that road. You pave it, it's gonna be an island. And that's, yes, we know that might need to be done, but we hopefully can limit the access or the advertising of access to that road.
Right. Well, I just wanted to make it clear, and we're going to let all of the residents know. But when the bridge is under construction, I know, but I want you to be aware right now that
Temporary bridge.
we're not doing a temporary bridge. That's why we do partially why we're redoing South Bronx. Yeah, it's gonna work out a lot better.
So state can deploy some strategic potholes along the road.
No offense to the town of Covert, but if it's not done right, I know there'll be a lot of potholes very soon. That's because
It'll be
it's washing out a
done
lot.
correctly,
It's washing out a lot.
no problem.
Before I forget, the web address is not super simple. We'll be getting our own website, probably relatively soon. But the web address for the page that has some information on the LDC is trumansburg-ny.gov/projects, plural, /Three Falls Local Development Corporation, and there's a hyphen between each word. And the words are spelled
Oh,
out.
my.
So
You can click through pretty quickly if you go to the main website and just click on projects. It's the first one listed.
Can you cut and paste?
So the main village website is trumansburg-ny.gov. And then look for the projects link, and it's right there.
Thank you. So I do see on the website that Three Falls LDC board meetings are occurring at 9:30 a.m. the first Thursdays of the month. I am curious if there's a possibility of changing that time so that those of us with 9 to 5 jobs can participate in the conversation.
It's a great question. You had lots of good questions tonight. The question was, is there a possibility of changing our LDC monthly meeting times to something other than Thursday mornings? The answer is possibly. It is open to the public. It is certainly open to the public. The issue right now is the availability of the board members while we get this thing stood up. But that is something we will discuss as to whether it might be better to hold it at some other time.
But the minutes are always available.
And I think it's also worth emphasizing that you can reach out to any and all of us at any time. We're all fairly available. We're all public officials, so it's pretty easy to find contact information. I don't want to speak for anyone, but I assume because we're all public officials, we would all welcome any communication you have.
We have not utilized the Zoom link at this point. You know, that will be something that we can certainly do. Some of it is functionally, some of it is just like we're doing tonight, having standing infrastructure in place. So when we meet in this room or that room, or we have to kind of shoehorn our way in between someone else's schedule from time to time, that's not conducive to having a standing capability for that, but we'll be moving in that direction.
Before anything, I want to apologize. I actually have to leave. I've got a young one at home who is under the weather tonight, and I've got to do a handoff. But I just wanted to thank everybody for being here and preparing. I know there are lots of people in the community who do, and it's been really gratifying to see so much public support for this initiative because it really is a once in a lifetime opportunity. The ability to acquire land, the ability to invest in our future for the long term. These things don't happen easily and they don't happen often. And so this has been a pleasure to work with the people here. So I apologize, that I'm dashing out. I didn't want to be rude and just.
Thanks.
yell back
Thanks,
there.
Caitlin. And on that note, actually, I realized that while I described the structure of the LDC and while we all introduced ourselves as our municipal roles, it's probably worthwhile understanding kind of what we do for the LDC. So the LDC structure itself has 3 members. That's the 3 municipalities. Each municipality authorizes 2 people to be their representatives on the LDC, on the board of directors of the Three Falls Local Development Corporation. So those are the 6 of us, 5 of us now that Caitlin's left. Each of our roles can change at any time when we either decide we don't want to do it anymore, or annually we have our annual organizational meeting. For 2023, I am the Three Falls LDC chair. Caitlin, who just left, is the vice chair. Ben Carver to my right is the treasurer, and Deb Nopke to his right is our secretary.
And State Parks does not have a seat in the LBC.
State
We're describing the organization.
State Parks, as my understanding, is not allowed to have a
Yeah,
seat
it's-
in the LDC.
That's true. too.
Which is somewhat unfortunate. We had talked about possibly an ex officio non-voting member coming from Parks, but that's not a possibility. But they're right down the road and very willing to help
Very helpful.
as it is. So I left out that detail at the beginning, so I wanted to add that. Any other comments or questions? Yes. Yeah, it's more for the folks online so they can hear. And everyone online, if you have any comments or questions, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom and we'll unmute you.
My name's Sean Rowland. I live in the village. I want to say thank you, Fred, and everyone. Like, this is a spectacular property. This is like, if you look at New York State as a whole, we have something remarkable. Like, I grew up in Romulus on the Army Depot, right? There's not a nice oak tree there, maybe, right? So in T-Burg, like, we have something very, very special here. Beyond like complications with community, there's such a rich asset that can enhance this community. So we all know this, I hope. And yeah, I'm just very grateful that it is a miracle that this happened. When you look at the character of that property, there's trees there that are not rivaled even at Taganic. If you think about the sycamores, there's chestnut oak, there's junipers that could be 300 or 400 years old. And then within Trumansburg, and everything here, we have Smith Woods. So like Trumansburg is an old growth town. This isn't like, Ovid. I mean, there's some nice walnut trees there, right? But there's, with all due respect to everywhere and like the history and what we've done. So my question is there a comprehensive master plan? Like an ecological master plan, does that fall on the LDC? Does that fall with the state park and their planners? Is there community involvement? Is there charrettes for that? That sort of thing. I think this can go a lot of different ways. There's different types of parks.
Yep.
There's different revenue generating things. There's limited access. Like if, I know everyone down on Frontenac's upset. So, how do we have a plan that makes parking, make it accessible, but not trash the place? There's currently camping in places that are not ecologically sensitive. So I think that that's my question. Is there a master plan for how this interacts with the town? How we think about access? And is there a plan for restoration? It's like as good as it gets for spring ephemerals, for old growth sycamores, for complex ecosystem. Like there's moss at Frontenac that's thicker than anywhere at this latitude. It's just like truly spectacular. So I just wonder, as I'm thinking about it, it's like, how do we have this beautiful thing and not ruin it? And I just think that there's a lot of ways to think about it. But it's like, I'm a landscape designer by trade or planner, not that I do it all the time, but like, if you think like that, you think, how do you make win-win situations for the ecosystem, for the people, and for access? So I think that's a major factor, and like a gut feeling. I mean, there is that nice property on 89. It's pretty flat, good access from the major road, plenty of ticket booths. It's obviously private now, But it would have provided excellent upland access to a site that would not necessitate, going on Frontenac Road. So I don't know the intentions of that land versus the whole property. But with integration, there could be win-wins for everybody getting access. I mean, this is a crazy idea. T-Bird could have a trolley, right? People come here not because they're on wine tour. You don't come to T-Bird because you're on wine tour. You might if you're smart, but you come here because it's gigantic, because there's oak trees you've never seen before, up there, and you didn't know what nature could look like that. So to me, and then the kids are going to be there, and that's huge. So I just think it's like a win-win for everyone. I'm grateful for it. So that was just my only question. The other one is we're not going to turn it into Samson, right? Because I mean, there's different LDC agreements and like private entity management agreements that could be anything from like a convenience store to a French chalet in the Alps, right? So we could, there's different. So obviously the LDC will have.
The LDC, that will be
Yeah.
at their discretion. It will have to be approved by state parks.
Yeah,
Any sort of a concession arrangement. So,
cool.
Do you want to speak to the planning for parks properties?
Sure, so there is within the state park system, we have our stewardship staff that can become involved with surveying. We have some planning staff. The LDC has the ability to apply for grant funding to conduct that sort of a program with Parks and Trails New York. We've sort of been teeing that up with PTNY as an opportunity. There is the annual CFA grant cycle. Parks has grant monies available for some of those initiatives. So I think it's just starting to cook, and planning is essential on the front end of this. I completely agree with you, so that you don't lose an opportunity, miss an opportunity, or step on something. So yeah, I get you, and you're right. It is a stunning piece of property.
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, sir. Nobody at Frontenac, I think, is upset about this process. I thought I heard you say that the folks at Frontenac are upset about it. If that's what you said, I don't think that is correct. I think most. I didn't. It's concerned. I mean, that was.
Yeah.
One last thing here. Just because I've worked on conservation projects for 15 years. There's a great opportunity to have a friends group to really, friends of stewardship. There's a lot of people who would care about this land, who would want to take their kids down there and, make it better. So I think there's just a great opportunity for that.
Yep.
And there would be that opportunity. And one thing I've heard is that people with a historic connection to that land want to be involved. And there's a fear that it just becomes a state managed thing. And we've heard tonight that it's not, that it's going to be a local endeavor so I think that's great.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ted. I'm local. I first went to Camp Barton when I was a Cub Scout back in the 60s. So I'm familiar with it way back. And I have a question for the BSA, and I apologize, I didn't get your names. I couldn't write fast enough during the introductions. Someone within the Scouts, I'm not going to mention the name, told me that the final list came down between Camp Tuscarora and Camp Barton for the sale. And it's your properties and it's your choice, but I am just curious why you decided to sell Camp Barton with the beautiful lakefront as opposed to Camp Tuscarora. Is that simply because it was worth more, or what was the thought process?
It was a very long and painful thought process that went on for a year at least. And then at the end, ultimately, this was the avenue that we saw that, yeah, absolutely. Camp Barton, the value of the property in Camp Barton far outweighs or far exceeded the value of the other property. And then we also balance that against, future revenue streams as membership in the BSC is declining. Scout camps across the nation are closing, being sold off. We calculated all of those things as well as the cost of maintenance and upgrades in order to, I would say, keep Camp Barton at its current level, but even to take it from what I think the National Camp Accreditation Program would consider it to be a C or a D facility, to bring it up to an A or even a B facility would require millions of dollars in investment that we cannot. This sale, the dollars that we receive from Camp Barton, secure our future for the next few years.
Any other questions, comments? Anyone online?
Can I make a couple comments?
Sure.
My name is Jim Dunn and I happily worked for Parks for 30 years. So Fred finally rolled me away to retirement. Not true. Not true. Not true. One of the things that occurred to me and it's kind of been bumping around is not just the inventory of what you've got for plants and your natural resources, but was alluded to right then is, are there buildings that you're going to tear down before you even do the transfer? I mean, have you done an inventory and said, there are buildings here that aren't going to fit with the future and we should just get rid of them now? And one of the reasons I say that is that buildings are the perennial maintenance headache. If you don't need it, how long do you really want to sustain it, kind of thing? And Fred can speak way better on this, but one of the ways you can get into trouble with state parks as your LLC is if you do things that aren't allowed by state parks. And it might be buildings, it might be removing trees, it might be changing creek beds, it might be, things that you would think would be, you're running a park and you think, oh, well, we'll just do this. And I think you have to be in close contact with Fred or his successors in order to not have that misunderstanding and doing things that are not allowable under the state park rules. Now, one of the things that I suspect you've already talked with Fred is use of Empire passports and what that does for your revenue. He alluded to using Reserve America for both your campground rental and potentially shelter rentals, because you've got all the cabins, that you could rent out, and many parks have them on Reserve America now. Some don't, maybe, but I think that was the trend. Cabins, campsites, and shelters. And if you're thinking marina, you're on a lake. I heard lake. You can do it for a marina too, if that's something that you work out with the state parks, that you can put in a couple finger piers or something and rent slips, or at least have a way to access the park by water. The Friends group was mentioned. It's nice that you're able to access those grants because you're already an LLC, whereas a park can't apply to grants, but a Friends group that works with a park can apply for those grants. So park manager can say to the Friends group, we need a new roof on X building, and the Friends group can apply for the grant, get the grant, turn it over to the park, or hire the contractor when the job gets done. But it sounds like you're already in that situation. Now, regarding the Friends group, I think for your first year, there's such goodwill towards Camp Barton. The first year, all you would have to do is put out and take down quickly a little blurb saying you could use some people to mow, to sweep, to open buildings, and you'd have a flood of people. It isn't sustainable forever, but certainly for a year, you could get volunteers, I believe, because there are so many people, probably many in the room, that have memories of Camp Barton that would love to go back and do that. So, Fred, I don't know what they can do as far, it sounds like swimming is part of the plan. And
as Fred well knows, lifeguards are difficult to come by, expensive, and they want to leave in early August. So that's a different story, but, and Fred's got there's a whole system that operates to try to keep that stream of potential lifeguard candidates coming in and the testing. And I'm assuming, Fred, that the lifeguards at a state park would have to meet the state park standard. So whether you guys can work hand in hand on that, I would think there's a way to do it. And the same would apply if you want to put up, obviously you're gonna need picnic tables, fire rings, whatever. If the state has got a contract, say, Fred, can we get in on the contract? Can we just apply on the contract? I mean, you're no longer a municipality, you're an LLC. So whether you apply, whether you can actually get the state contract prices or not, I don't know, but it would seem that there would be a way to do cleaning supplies, all that stuff that comes, court graft, all that stuff that you get. But I'm thrilled. Oh, don't squish the salamanders on the rainy nights in April. Because they flock down there on the road. And anybody that lives down there knows that there's certain nights in April where you're dodging salamanders, and really, that's not a joke. You should plan for that, because you have to go there some rainy night in April and you'll understand.
Instead of song.
Salamander State Park. And my dad was 1944, he was a troop leader and led a troop at age 16, because everybody was going to the war. So it was 1944. It was a couple years at Camp Barton. So
That's great.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Brad, why not?
So just, but what about access now? I mean, people have asked me, can I go down and walk up to the fall? Well, okay, I mean, I'm right, it's not always yet. Is there's still a camp ranger down there? Is it full-time or no, he's not anymore?
No, Dave, they went back to Florida. here
Okay.
after the summer, shut off all the water.
Okay,
Secured all the buildings, we changed all the locks very recently. And every weekend we have a little master ball.
Sure, right.
So that's what we have down there now.
okay.
And then, the staff alumni association, they installed some cameras, I got some cameras in.
Okay. May I suggest a few more no trespassing signs if that's what you want to have happen?
I'll have a very double put them up next week.
Yeah, I mean, along the waterfront or stuff.
Across the docks, so.
Hey, that's your liability, not mine.
No, they're good.
That's all.
Anyone else in person or online?
But can you do Airbnb kind of thing with residents?
Be allowable, glamping would be allowed, there's a lot of potential. And we've had some brainstorming of what that potential would be, but I think there needs to be working with the LDC, some planning and some thought that goes into how does that all get rolled in, and elected officials, people with day jobs, balancing that with this new responsibility. The real emphasis has been on, let's stand up the corporate entity, make sure that meets with the requirements for state parks in order to allow us to purchase the property. So that's really, again, what everybody's been focused on. I think now, I don't want to speak for the LDC, but we're at a point where we've accomplished this. There's other work that can get done now.
Yeah, the primary effort of the last 19 months has been, how do we not screw this up so that parks can actually acquire the property? And frankly, for anyone who's ever bought a piece of property, you don't own it until the ink is dry on the paper, right? So don't, Right, exactly. So that's why that's been the focus of our efforts to this point. And we're close enough to the finish line now that we were able to hold this meeting. But the next step, the next phase is going to be all of the planning, all of the efforts. And the reason why this is going to be a phased in effort. I'm not going to speak for the whole group. They can certainly outvote me. But I don't see any way we offer swimming in the summer of 24, for instance, right? So this is very much a business model that we're going to grow into. With the intent, we're thinking, the next 2 decades, not the next 2 years. And so that needs to be the focus of our ongoing efforts as we get closer to close. You say so. Any other comments or questions?
Historically, what has been the timeline for the other ones that you've given examples of that municipalities have taken over?
The timeline to make that happen?
Yeah, for them to be fully functioning is the end goal.
I mean, the Sojourner Truth Park is still in the process of being developed. It's even rawer than Camp Barton is. It's an old concrete factory in the Hudson Valley that they're converting to a state park that Hudson Valley is a shoot. That's essentially serving the role of the LDC of the Three Falls LDC. So they're going to be the managing entity for that. So that's several years out. Camp Beechwood is operated by the town of Sodas. That's a program. They've actually been stepping up in the last 5 years into some new exciting programming areas where they are now taking camping reservations. They've got some lean-tos. They've got a much stronger youth program in there than they had historically. So.
Anyone else? Brad's trying to think of one more question.
Move to adjourn.
Well, if there aren't any additional questions, and I don't see anyone online with any questions, I'll close by thanking everyone for coming. I'm pleased with how many people joined us in person and online. Appreciate your continued interest, appreciate your support. As Ben mentioned, I don't know if any of you are college football fans, to borrow a line from Coach Prime, we're not hard to find. So if you need anything from any of us, reach out, email. Heck, I think my cell phone is even public. So, reach out, call, text, email if you have questions or comments. But we certainly appreciate you being here tonight, appreciate your support, and stay tuned. So thank you. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Fred. So we met.
You did. Let me